Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Thanks for showing up for another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And on this episode, you will hear me getting pretty interested in the topics as we go through how to navigate international real estate markets with my guest, Ladislas Maurice, who is the wandering investor. Now, this is a great option if you want to invest outside of the United States or wherever you live if you're looking for alternative citizenship options or residency. We go all through it. Let's go. This is episode 206 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Ladislas Maurice. Ladislas is dedicated to helping others navigate global investing. He's an international investor and consultant with experience in nearly 100 countries. He's lived in at least 12 of them, speaks at least 5 languages. This is going to be fun. Ladislas, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you, Jonathan?
Doing great. And I should say you're the founder of The Wandering Investor because that's what it says down there. And that's what I want to get into, though. When you were growing up, were you thinking about real estate and travel, or is it something that you came to after your time? Because I know you work globally at Nestle.
So I grew up with my parents taking me around a lot. My father was a university professor, and he would just get contracts in random universities in North America, Europe, the Middle East, etc. And I would just tag along. So as a teenager, I just traveled around a lot, and I figured I would continue doing that. And then I added business to it.
Yeah, that probably was pretty fun. Probably hard to maintain the friendships and stuff because this is maybe, before everything on social media was as easy as it is now.
Yeah, no, it was pretty hard because effectively when you live this way, you're always the new kid in school, right?
Right.
So it's not only a new school, but it's also a new school and a new culture. So you have to learn all the codes, etc. Then it takes about 2 years to become cool, right? And then once you start becoming cool, you're like, I'm cool. Then your parents take you somewhere else, and then you're the new kid again.
Yeah. Well, culturally, that obviously has significance to what you do now because operating and trying to buy real estate and understand real estate in all of these different areas and countries certainly comes with differentiators in each area culturally and just operationally, right?
Absolutely. It really helps build tolerance for ambiguity, which is absolutely necessary, especially when you operate in emerging markets.
Yeah, it's funny because if you just operate like in an American market, people would say like, hey, ambiguity is going to get you in trouble. But if you're going outside, you really have to have that because you can't come in thinking that you know everything into a new area. You'll never be able to buy a property.
Yeah, exactly. And these markets by nature are very ambiguous. There isn't data like there is in the US. So, specifically for real estate in the US and Canada, et cetera, we're pretty lucky. We have the MLS. There's literally all the information you need. You start going into Latin America, actually most of Europe, even Western Europe, there's nothing. There's very little data out there. So it's ambiguous, and there's inherently a bit more risk in transactions because there's a wider gap in knowledge between you and the locals.
Yeah, and that's where you need to build up more or know somebody like yourself who can navigate in those markets because you really can be off balance. Because I think I've even heard in some areas, realtors don't need any training at all. Not that they're well trained in America, but like you can just pick up in another country and say, today I think I'm going to sell a house today, and you can. Am I correct on that?
Yeah. I mean, most realtors I work with in emerging markets just, one day woke up and said they're realtors.
I mean, it's funny. It's not that different in America, even though it's 90 hours of training. It still seems to work out in a similar fashion. But let's go back. While you were doing all this traveling, and then as you got into your international job, when did you start thinking that you might transition to real estate?
It was a gradual process. So when I was working at Nestle in South Africa, I had made my first real estate investment, actually in the US and in Texas.
Oh, interesting.
And then I started making other investments in Eastern Europe and West Africa, etc. So when I decided to leave my corporate career at the age of 30, because I had spent at that point 7 years with Nestle, mostly in Africa, a little bit in Switzerland, mostly in Africa. I already had a bit of experience in real estate, and then it became a full-time thing.
Certainly the amount of international travel that you had before 30 must have helped you when you started buying in different countries. And like you said, trying to figure out, like, are there regulations? How do I get stuff? But I'm sure languages and proximity to other countries, at least, I guess I would say, help grease the wheels a little bit. Not somebody who's just popping up from, West Texas into the Dominican Republic and saying, hey, how can I buy a house, right?
It helped a lot. No, that's for sure. And look, on the topic of ambiguity, because a lot of these countries have very complicated regulations in many cases, but they're not implemented, they're not enforced, etc. So, there's what you should be doing in these markets, and then there's what actually happens, and you need to be comfortable with the delta between the two.
Yeah, just in general, because this is where I want to really start and then do a deep dive. How easy or hard is it for somebody in America to just buy something out of the country? Because my guess is, just from talking to other people, we've had a few international episodes, it's not as easy as just going on Zillow, finding a realtor and buying a house here.
I mean, in many cases, it can be that easy. You can buy remotely in most countries. No, and I don't recommend buying remotely. Like, I really recommend people go to the destination first, take their time, get an understanding, etc. But it's possible to buy entirely remotely. The way it works is typically you find a realtor. Actually, even if you go to the country, let's say you go to Colombia or you go to Montenegro or you go to Egypt, whatever. You go there, you talk to one realtor or a few realtors, because again, there's no MLS, so they often have their own listings.
Yeah.
You negotiate on a property. Negotiations also overseas are very different from the US. They can often be very irrational. In the
I've
US, generally speaking, the person, across from you is a rational actor in most cases.
One would hope.
Yeah, one would hope, yeah. In some cultures, the person across from you is invariably not a rational actor. Yeah. So you negotiate, and then you just leave power of attorney with a lawyer, and then the lawyer can just buy in your name or through a corporate structure. In most cases overseas, people buy in their own name, not in an LLC, because again, in most cases, people don't just get sued randomly like in the US. Like I'll give you an example. I was selling a little farm in Montenegro, so a little country in the Balkans between Croatia and Albania. And I had a guy from, I think, California visit, and he wanted to view the property. He saw I was selling it. He contacted me. He wanted to see it directly without a realtor. I was fine with that because I'd avoid paying a commission.
Yeah.
I wasn't there. My family wasn't there. I talked to him on video, and he looked all right. I was like, all right, look, okay. Here's the key. Like, if you go into the barn and you look there, you'll find the key. Just walk around and then just put it back there discreetly. Just I trust you. So he does that, and then he calls me, 2 hours later on video call, and he's completely wet. And then he had gone to the end of the property where there's a river, and somehow he fell into the river.
Oh my gosh.
And my first reaction was just to laugh. And he was shocked that I was laughing. He was like, why are you laughing? Why are you laughing? And I was like, well, if this was in the US, I'd be really scared you'd sue me right now. But in Montenegro, the cops will just laugh at you.
Yeah, you should have just been careful where you were walking. I mean,
yeah. Then he got over it, and then he laughed about it too. So, look, people, generally speaking, unless there's specific tax reasons or estate planning reasons, when you go overseas, you just buy in your own name in most cases.
Yeah, is the banking and money transfer and then also mortgages, are mortgages an issue or do you have to really be buying cash most of the time for this to work out?
Yeah, very good question. It's a topic that North Americans typically struggle with, in the sense that North Americans have such easy access to credit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. When you venture overseas, in the vast majority of cases, you don't have access to credit locally, especially if you venture into emerging markets.
Yeah.
Western Europe, in some cases, even then, you'll be paying much higher rates than locals. They'll be asking for much higher deposit, and the paperwork will be insane. So in most cases, it's a cash purchase. You can get credit back home, back in Canada, back in the US. That works.
Yeah.
Dangerous because often currency fluctuation. So people need to be aware of this. And then the banking, it really depends on your bank. Look, there are no capital controls in the US nor in Canada, so you legally can just wire money out. That's not a problem.
Right.
The issue is rather with compliance departments of banks, where you need to just prep them. So, for example, if you're going to...
I want to spring it on them the night before. Hey, I'm just about to close on something in Croatia tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. And just try to wire 300K to Croatia. Like, that's just not going to go well. So, before doing that, you just call your banker. It's like, hey, John, I'm going to go to Croatia. I want to buy a place. Just letting you know, can you increase the limits on my online banking for international wires?
Yeah.
What's your email so that I can send the purchase contract to you before making the transfer, so that if compliance asks for it, you can send it to them.
Have it already.
But if you do this, in 99% of cases, you won't have any issues. The issue is people who, and that's happened sometimes. They go overseas, they sign a contract, they put like 2% down in cash or whatever, and then they want to send the rest before a certain date, and then their bank is what? And then they can't, and then they lose their deposit. So just with a bit of planning, this doesn't happen.
Yeah. How do you know that you're not getting scammed? Because I just feel like you've obviously been through this so much, but I would just think that somebody going to buy out of country, whether it's people coming here or going the other way, how do you really figure out, that you've got the right people, especially if you're in countries where there's no MLS, so you don't have, Zillow and Zillow reviews. There's not as much social proof on the agent and the property. How do you make sure that, this is actually all real and you're not just sending the wire into the void?
Look, that's a really good question, because you often see these things on TV or on YouTube. I got scammed in Nicaragua, like I got scammed in Mexico.
Yeah.
Look, hire the best lawyers in town. That's it. Yeah. That's what it comes down to. That's what I do when I arrive somewhere. I'm new and I decide to go ahead and purchase a property. I don't try to get the cheapest lawyer. There's always a cheaper lawyer out there.
Yeah.
I just go to law firms that have experience with foreigners, because often the issues with foreigners are different. So, for example, I've seen this happen a lot in Colombia. So Colombia has some form of capital controls. A lot of Americans are buying. We're helping a lot of Americans and Canadians buy in Medellin, and Bogota as well. And we've seen from other people what happens is they go there, they go to Colombia, they find an apartment that they love, and then, they'll use their girlfriend's cousin's brother's, lawyer who's like a local lawyer somewhere, and he'll just help them with the transaction. But that lawyer just deals with local issues, and he's not aware that when you invest in Colombia as a non-resident, you need to make a central bank declaration when you bring the funds in, so that when you sell in a few years' time, you can take your money out. Because when you try to take your money out, the bank will ask you for the central bank declaration when the money came in. If you don't have this, your money's stuck in Colombia. That local lawyer might not know it. But if you go to the bigger law firms that deal with foreigners, you don't run into issues like this. So I always just use above average lawyers, and invariably my lawyers are a bit more expensive than, the market price. But that's how I operate, and that's how I never got scammed.
Smart. And that's a big differentiator than American real estate, where you're generally, in my opinion, when we're just talking about residential real estate, your best attorneys are just really solo real estate attorneys and not firms, because the firms are too segmented into higher things than, an $1,800 real estate transaction. But overseas, that makes complete sense to me. And that's exactly how I would operate. I always want to operate with someone who I know is protecting me. They're a bigger law firm who's used to doing bigger deals with people out of the country, is going to keep you safe. That's great advice, because I think there's probably, myself included, a lot of people who probably, just thinking all the time, it would be really cool to own stuff out of the country to use and also to rent out. What are the regulations like for renting places out if you own it as a foreigner in terms of short-term rentals? It could be, different obviously for the countries, but are there anything that make it tougher for that? Because I'm sure everybody who's collecting properties in multiple countries isn't just going to leave them vacant all the time.
Yeah, it really depends on the country. You need to do your research. I mean, we help clients with that. Some countries just let you do whatever. Other countries are really harsh in terms of rules, Airbnb restrictions, taxes, etc. If you invest in Africa, it's a little looser than investing in Paris, right? So it just really depends. But if you're a resident of the U.S., so if you're a U.S. person, or if you're a tax resident of Canada, you do have to declare your overseas income on real estate.
Oh, right.
This is not tax advice. Generally speaking, the way it works is you pay your taxes there on real estate. So real estate is always taxed in the country where it is located. Mm-hmm. And then typically, in most cases, you get a credit for the taxes that you paid there, and then you pay the balance, if any, in the U.S. Canada, similar, though they have double tax treaty agreements, which make it better for Canadians than for Americans.
Yeah. When you started buying those first couple of properties, because they were in drastically different areas, are you buying condos, single family homes? What's it like when you're buying out of the country? Is it safer to buy condos, townhouses, where you have some form of, I guess, a little bit of help, maybe with an HOA or something, or single family houses? It really depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, it really depends on the market. Every market is different. So the way I operate is I focus, for example, I'll see a country. I'm like, okay, this looks like an interesting macro story. Then I go there and I'll spend a few weeks or a few months in that country asking myself, how do I play it? Right? So for example, a few years ago, I went to Uzbekistan. The country was just emerging from a rough communist dictatorship. They had just not elected, but a new guy came into power, and he was rolling out the red carpet for foreign investors. So I went there with the thinking, I want to buy real estate. And I went there. I saw that legally, in the type of real estate that looked interesting, you couldn't buy as a foreigner. But you could if you used a local company, but then you weren't allowed to rent it out, but people were doing it and getting away with it. And they were just emerging out of this phase, and it was a little too risky for me. So I continued looking around, and then I saw that they had a stock market in Uzbekistan, right? Who would have thought? So I started digging in there, and then I found companies that had P ratios of like 2 or 3, that had dividend yields of 15, 20%, that had zero debt on their balance sheets, and that were growing like 30, 40% a year.
Yeah.
So this looks a little bit more straightforward than real estate. So, in that case, I went for real estate. Recently, I know 2-3 years ago, I was looking at Serbia because of its unique geopolitical position, where it's in Europe, but it's not fully aligned with the West, and it's not fully aligned with the East. It's playing in between the EU, Russia, China, with a lot of Gulf investment. And I thought it was interesting what they were up to. And I could see a lot of FDI was going to come into the country. And I went there, and, the stock market was just completely liquid, unreformed. They had crazy rules like, if you sell stocks, your money is stuck in your brokerage account for 6 months until you pay capital gains locally. like ridiculous stuff. And then real estate was already quite expensive. It was more expensive than Budapest in the EU. So I just wasn't comfortable, and I didn't find a way to play it. I didn't know how to play Serbia. Turns out I was wrong. Real estate continued going up. It was expensive. Now it's extremely expensive. But I didn't find any reasonable way to play it. And, a few weeks ago, Kenya is interesting. I went to Kenya and I bought a few apartments. They're just condos off plan, downtown Nairobi, the capital city, from a Chinese developer. And the play there is not only that it's really cheap for, really nice apartments with like heated swimming pools and all that, and, all the amenities.
I think I saw one of those videos on your Instagram. I was like, this is nice. Like, really nice.
It's very nice. But then also the payment plan is over 2.5 years, fixed in Kenyan shillings. So as the country seems to be headed for a debt issue, I have a free call option on essentially a devaluation of the Kenyan shilling. Yeah. So if a devaluation happens in the next 2.5 years, my last payments will be a lot cheaper. So, I figured that was an interesting way to play Kenya. So it just really depends from market to market.
Yeah, I really like the way that you're looking at it. And now kind of the wandering investor is really making crystal sense to me, because no other people don't have the time to be able to go and say like, hey, I'm going to do 6 months here, 4 months here, 3 months here, just to see if I want to invest there. That's where you come in and can assist, because these things are so important. I don't think you can get a good idea of an entire country, or at least a large city in a country, just by spending a week there. Like I've been to Asia once. I was in Japan for a week, and people are like, how was it? I'm like, it was a blur. 3 days in Tokyo and 3 days in Kyoto is not enough time for me to have any idea really what just happened. So you're able to spend these times. And like you said, you're making conscious decisions also to say, now I don't see a good enough play here, and you're okay even if it does go up. Like you said, I believe it was Serbia where the real estate went up, but it still wouldn't have been, you didn't have enough information at the time. Is this where you came up with the idea of the wandering investor? Because people can't make all these decisions on these areas. It's basically, they just figure it out on a vacation or something and hope for the best.
Yeah, it initially came because when I was making international real estate investments, I would, look online, and there's just no credible information.
Yeah.
Or there'd be these like random...
And probably a lot of scam stuff now also, because it's just kind of a hotbed, I think.
Or just poor analysis, or just stuff just written by realtors, always stuff written by realtors and real estate agencies, which is not a good analysis. Yeah. And then I saw a gap in the market where it's, there's people need on the ground, no nonsense information. So this is what I do.
Yeah. And so important, because it's the usage that's so important. If you pick an area again, this can happen in America too. You pick an area and then you find out, short-term rentals don't work here. And that was your whole plan. And like, you're not going to get a good enough return on a long-term rental. You're in trouble. So really understanding the plan of what you're looking for is something that you're doing boots on the ground for yourself to figure out, I don't know, I can't really find it here, but maybe somebody else could do this in this particular part. I love what you said about Kenya. That's just really smart. You're hedging against its own inflation in a way that could help you. And really the input is not that astronomical anyway for something that looks really good.
I'm paying $70,000 for a 1.5 bedroom apartment, 15th floor in one of the best neighborhoods in a growing city of, right now it's like over 5 million people. The population will double in the next 25 years with all the amenities, parking, swimming pool, just everything, gym.
Hey, it's Jonathan. I hope you're enjoying this episode with a wandering investor, Ladislas Maurice. If you're like me and you want to take it another level, which I did a full call with Ladislas. It was actually 2 calls to find out where the best places for me to invest would be based on potential residency, potential citizenship, or just alternative asset options. So if you want to do that same thing that I did with Ladislas, go to wanderinginvestor.com. Set up your call there and let them know that you got this info from this podcast. Let's get back to Ladislas. How do you know when you're going to other countries whether they're, I guess, friendly to investors coming from outside? I would hope most places are, but I would just assume maybe not all. How do you figure that out in the beginning? Obviously you're going in, you're trying to make these relationships, but are all places open to that? Or do you really have to kind of do the research that you're doing to figure out where that's going to work?
And most countries are fine with foreign investment. I mean, some countries just say foreigners can't buy real estate. I mean, there's a lot of that. Some countries have capital controls where investing there is a one way, which you don't want.
Right. It's not coming back out.
Yeah. And it ultimately what it comes down to is, what's the level of bureaucracy and what's the taxation, right? Some countries just have so much bureaucracy, you just don't want to deal with it, unless you really like the place.
Yeah.
And, like Brazil's one of those, like it's just the bureaucracy is just hell and the taxes and this and that. But I mean, lifestyle, Brazil's amazing, right? So it just depends.
Yeah. Well, let's hit some highlights for the listeners of just maybe a few countries that you think are like around now or in the next couple of years are really strong investment markets based on your research or where you're investing. Because like myself, I don't really know. I just know from places I've gone, but I'm already excessively interested just on the stuff that you've given us so far. So maybe just throw us out a couple areas that you think are really, really good for out-of-country investors, whether they be from any other area besides that country.
Sure. So let's not venture into equities. I mean, that's a different topic.
Yeah. I
could mention a bunch of things I'm interested in equities. With regards to real estate, I think the main message is people need to manage their expectations when they're buying real estate overseas, right? If you want to make easy money in real estate, there is no easy money in real estate anymore. The central banks have just been printing money for the past 10, 15 years. And valuations are, in many cases, quite rich across the world. So sure, there are markets that are going to go up, but there aren't any markets without a relatively high level of risk where it's a no-brainer, easy investment, right? So I think and I'll answer which markets I find interesting.
Yeah.
But I think the message is when Americans or Canadians want to invest overseas, people need to be clear with their objective. What do they want it for, right? And in most cases, when you buy real estate overseas, it's either lifestyle, right? Access to a second residency or citizenship, right?
Yeah.
Or diversification, like not having all your eggs in one basket. The reality is, if you're worth a few $1 million, it's fundamentally irresponsible to have everything back home in Canada or in the US. Like, especially with the whole political developments of people increasingly hating each other.
Yeah. Whichever
side of the aisle people are on, I don't care. The reality is there's a lot of hate. There are a lot of issues. And, if you're worth, $3-4 million or even like $2 million, is it that crazy to put $200,000, in either a bank account overseas or in a property overseas that gets your residency permit for you, your family, just in case? I think it's a very reasonable thing to do. So I think that's the main aspect. On top of that, in some countries, you get, decent or half decent returns as well.
Yeah.
So,
I would suspect before you get to the markets, it's not like just thinking in your country, like, hey, I'm going to buy this for cash flow. Like, you should not be going international with the hope being I'm going to cash flow on this thing, because there's just graduated risks in that thing where you really want the usage, like you said, or the citizenship. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Generally speaking, rental yields are lower in most markets in the world compared to the US. The great thing about the US is that there's always some place that's doing great, right? Even if there's a recession, there's always some random little town, if you do your research, that's booming because whatever, something's happening there, a new mine open there or a factory or something. And you get easy leverage, and buy multifamily housing and blah, 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 blah. It's much harder to do that overseas. So just, step number one, manage your expectations. 2, be clear with your objectives. Then we can identify the right markets. But some markets that I find interesting, look, Colombia has some pretty interesting rental yields. If you go into Medellin, you go into the midterm market, there's a ton of American digital nomads that are going down there. Real estate is cheap per square foot, per square meter. And then you have all these Americans that are coming down and they go to Medellin for lifestyle. So they actually want to pay high rents to have like nice apartments, because Medellin is a place where mostly men go there for dating and going out and having fun, blah, blah. So they want to impress. So, you combine cheap property with people who want to impress. If you execute correctly, you can get some pretty good returns. So that's one that's interesting. A country that is only mildly interesting from a real estate point of view, but that offers a good plan B residency, is Panama. Essentially, you just send $200K into a bank account and a term deposit for 3 years, or into local real estate, and you get residency for yourself and your whole family. So, plan B, if you don't like the political situation, etc., you just have real estate there for 3 years. You can sell it after, or just, remove your term deposit after 3 years, send it back to the US, but you'll still have that residency. So this is something that a lot of Americans are doing as a plan B. Yeah. One that's a bit out there, but that a lot of people have done, is getting Turkish citizenship. All right. So this one is pretty wild when you think of it. All you need to do is invest $400,000 US in any real estate in Turkey. So look, Turkey often has a bad rep, but it's a huge country, 80 million people. It's an industrial export, military powerhouse right there between Europe and the Middle East. Istanbul, one of the biggest cities, most important cities in the world, 16 million people, huge history. The world's most connected airline, Turkish Airlines, is based there, has its hub there. So you have flights to everywhere from Istanbul. When you're in Istanbul, you really see you're at the crossroads of Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. It's a fascinating place. And all you need to do is to invest $400,000 in any real estate. And within a year, without even being there, you just have to go there once, you will get Turkish citizenship, an actual passport for you, your spouse, and all your underage children, which then goes down the generation. So even when your kids have kids later on, as long as they register the kids, let's say you're sitting in Houston, you're like, oh, this sounds cool. You can buy remotely, right? Buy real estate remotely. You go there for all the fingerprinting, all that. Yeah. And then you'll get your passport after a year. And then whenever your kids have kids, they can just register them at the nearest consulate in the US or in DC or wherever. Wow. And they'll be Turks. And then with a Turkish passport, it's part of NATO, but in many ways it's non-aligned. Right. It gets you access to countries you would have issues traveling to as a US person. It certainly gets you a friendlier look when you're crossing borders into Muslim countries, etc. Yeah. You can go into Iran, travel, visa free. So it's an interesting, intergenerational play. It's a legacy, essentially. You don't buy a Turkish passport for you, really. You buy it as a legacy, because who knows what the world would look like in 50 or 100 years from now. Maybe your grandkids will be extremely thankful that they have a Turkish passport. Yeah, these are unbelievable points, because before you had mentioned it, I was like, wow, wait, were you saying that you can buy real estate somewhere and it would turn into citizenship? And you've already just told us two back to back. And that's a very interesting way to think about real estate, because I don't think a lot of people are thinking about it this way, but we are in a very, I would say, odd political time. Like you said, extreme in both directions, at least in America. So like you said, whichever side you're on, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So it's actually a really smart bet to combine your interest in real estate investing, hedge your bets for a place that you could go just for visiting,
but also that could provide you something later. Very, very interesting. Any other countries on just, if you're just talking about, I wouldn't say real estate yield, like you gave us the first one, was that yield sounded pretty good in Colombia, but is there another place where you're saying, appreciation in this area is really going to be good for buying real estate?
Cool. In terms of appreciation, if you're patient, I think some places in Nicaragua are quite interesting. It is, the markets, essentially the markets just went up everywhere in Central America and Mexico during COVID, not in Nicaragua, because they're under light US sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
So, the economy is a little, or rather the flow of foreign investors going there is a little slow, of Western investors buying real estate.
Yeah.
But the reality is China is investing a lot of money in Nicaragua right now. No one's really talking about it. The infrastructure in the country is being completely revamped. Highways, railroads, ports, logistics centers. It's just incredible. There's so much Chinese money going there. And at the same time, with the border having been open for the past few years, 6.5% of the Nicaraguan population moved to the US. So essentially, you had 6.5% of the population that was either unemployed, underemployed, or criminals. So they were a cost to society in most cases. They left. So it had no impact on, the local economy. If anything, it was positive. They're now in the US, they're earning money, and they're sending remittances back. So suddenly they move from being negatives to positives for the economy through remittances. So this is also very bullish.
Yeah.
So Nicaragua is one, but it's not low risk. It's relatively high risk.
Yeah.
And one that I think is really interesting, Sicily. Sicily is just dirt cheap right now. It is ridiculous.
Wow. I wouldn't expect that.
It's insane. Look, it never recovered from 2011 because there was a big euro crash in 2011. Yeah. Since then, real estate prices have gone up pretty much everywhere in Europe. Not really in Italy. And in Sicily right now, you can buy, just gorgeous apartments that need a renovation in like beautiful little towns for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, right? Then you do a full renovation. The full renovation will cost you about $100 per square foot.
Mm-hmm.
But then you'll have something really nice, absolutely stunning. And if you play your cards right because the problem is in Sicily, because it's so cheap, it's been attracting cheap European investors. But actually the market in terms of rentals is going for upmarket investors, Americans, Northern Europeans, etc. So if you do a nice Airbnb, you can make some pretty decent yields of after taxes of 4 to 5% net, maybe 6, and have a nice lifestyle property down in Sicily. So this is, with just $200,000, you can get something really nice.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, this is amazing. This is really eye-opening for me. We've had a couple kind of international touch shows, but this is like real deep dive. How much are you traveling to learn all this information? And when you're traveling, are you always just thinking like, hey, is this going to be, like you said, is there a play here for real estate?
I travel full time. So I do this all the time. Right now I'm in Europe. I was in Kenya like a few weeks ago, and in a few weeks I'm off to Malaysia, Singapore, Cambodia. I'm just always exploring, going around with my family. They follow me on most of these trips.
That's awesome.
So that's what I do. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. That's a really good experience though. Like you were saying though, it was hard for you because you get that 2-year window. Just as you're getting cool, you're going to move. But I'm sure you're trying to do things to help, your family get adjusted. But also there's something to be said for this new kind of lifestyle where you're just going to get so much culture for yourself and for your whole family that it gives you a much broader understanding of the world. For me, I've lived in America my whole life. I've traveled, off and on, but not a lot. And I don't think culturally I'm that sophisticated, outside because I haven't learned from being in other countries more than a week,
It's all relative, sophistication and culture is all relative to your context.
Yeah. Fair point. I just think it's very worldly, which is interesting, because a lot of people, as they get older, I wish I traveled more, and you guys are doing it. But do you find a way to kind of make wherever you are home for that time being, just based on you have so much experience, and of course you're owning places in a lot of areas, so you probably can use those as you go across the world.
Yeah, I have a few places around. The ones in long-term rentals I can't use. But ultimately, what you figure out is, as you travel around, home is where your family is. You become less attached to the environment, and you become more attached to the people.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, if you look at United States real estate right now, rates are high. There's low inventory. Home ownership is becoming less and less affordable. So I do think that people are going to start to make different decisions that they got the idea of, again, during the pandemic. They were just like, hey, I'll just go to Bali or somewhere. Like you were saying, Panama is a hotbed for where people can be, or Colombia. I think it's going to be a different way for the next generation. They may be able to do these virtual work situations, or just figure out how to live that life, and going to do experiences over kind of staying put their whole lives.
I mean, they're like Italy, for example. I'll just jump in there. I have to I keep raving about Italy because I just couldn't believe how cheap it is. Look, Sicily specifically, going into these really cute little towns. At Margarita Pizza, €5. Or less than $6 for a full-size pizza, margarita, and not some like random pizza.
And the best pizza you've ever had.
Right. Like actual Italians made this pizza. Right. Beers for €2 was standard in these little towns. So $2.50 for a nice Italian beer. I even went to a bar one night. They had a special. €1 per beer. I mean, that's cheaper than Mexico. That's like Colombian prices. It's ridiculous. And you're in Europe, and you have cheap flights because again, Sicily is affordable. There are cheap flights to everywhere in Europe because Europeans like to come down to Sicily for a cheap vacation.
Yeah.
So if you're based in Sicily, you can easily fly out to the rest of Europe, and getting residency as an American is not that complicated. You can either create a subsidiary of or a branch of your US LLC if you have an active US LLC, or if you can demonstrate about $35,000 of passive income a year, you can qualify. So
35,000 of passive from any sources, or from out of country sources?
From any source, wherever in the world, dividends, royalties, rental income, etc. Passive, non-active income.
Yeah,
and you're good. So. Yeah, or just the US LLC, whatever US LLC you have, even if it's just a property in there.
Yeah.
Getting rental income, that can qualify. You can just say, hey, I'm looking to grow my business in Italy, and they'll grant you residency this way, and you can live in Italy. Taxes are not low, but there's a bunch of tax incentives if you choose the right one, and there's a double tax treaty agreement with the U.S., which is quite advantageous in terms of social security. So it's just a matter of people making the decision, and there's just a world of opportunities out there in terms of lifestyle, in terms of feeling freedom, and whatever side of the political aisle you're on. If you're Republican and you want your guns and freedom, there are options for that. If you're liberal and you want whatever rights, there are options for that as well.
Yeah.
There's a world tailored to whatever it is you're into. You just need to find the right spot. And that's what we help people do ultimately.
Yeah. In terms of residency, like say you did that in Italy or somewhere else, is there like an amount of time that you have to stay there to keep the residency?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it depends on the residency. So, for example, a residency in Panama, you just need to set foot there once every 24 months. So once every 2 years for 24 hours to keep it active. Yeah. Italy, that one that we just discussed, they want you to be there for 3 or 4 appointments within a 2-month frame every year, but like specific appointments. So maybe it's like March and April of a year, you just need to be in Italy.
Yeah.
Right? So it depends.
That
It
seems
really
like a
depends on the country.
good plan, though.
Yeah.
I feel like you're creating this. I have so much in my head. I can't wait to talk to you after this. But let's talk about the wandering investor, because it's very, very interesting. You've honestly given so much information already that I know people are going to be interested in reaching out. So what do you do for people when they reach out to you in terms of identifying, countries or options? Because you've given unbelievable ideas for me already. So give us a little bit about what happens when people come to you and what they can expect.
Sure. So, I have a consulting package. Essentially, we start with a half-hour call where I just ask questions and I drill into who you are, what you're looking for, your situation, etc., to really understand you as a person. Yeah. And then after a week or so, after I've had time to think, then we have the whole full strategy call where we really drill into the different options that are available for real estate, for residency, for citizenship, to create essentially a plan that would be appropriate for you.
Sounds amazing. I'll be setting my appointment. So, are there countries that you're interested in that just aren't there yet, but they're like on your short list of, I haven't, done enough due diligence yet, but these are like my real next interested ones that I want to go to?
Yeah. So one I want to go to for real estate specifically is Cambodia. I went there in 2018 to look at real estate. I wasn't feeling it. It felt just way too bubbly. And the market tanked.
Yeah.
So now from what I'm hearing is that the market, it's still very much a buyer's market. And I want to go there and I want to see if there are opportunities on empty inventory. So inventory that developers are sitting on, and just trying to see, hey, if I buy like 5 apartments, how hard can I negotiate?
Yeah.
And is it worth it? So I'm going there for a month in January. So I booked a place there and I'll just be going around and exploring.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a smart thing to do in and of itself. You said if you know that there's developer inventory somewhere that you can go then in bulk and get a great deal, because they need to get more activity going just to say they have more sales, and they need to get these things gone.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah. Any areas where you're like definitely not a good spot to invest? Nothing against the country, but real estate investment wise, not looking like a good spot.
I'd say a lot of Western Europe, Germany, France, the UK, Belgium, Spain.
Yeah.
Italy, Italy's different because it's just cheap. So it's like whatever.
Yeah.
These places are, even Portugal, though I know Portugal has had a wild run. I wouldn't buy these valuations right now in Portugal. I would run away from Portugal.
Yeah.
The reality is that Europe is facing a lot, and Eastern Europe and the Balkans are different. They have very different dynamics. But Western Europe specifically have massive issues, very high debt to GDP ratios.
Yeah.
The war with Russia is hurting Western Europe a lot. It got cut off from its source of cheap energy. So its industrial base is now not competitive at all. Its economy is just not reformed, hugely, a lot of regulations, bureaucracy. The demographics are terrible, much worse than in the U.S. In the U.S., it's actually not bad, in Canada either. But in Western Europe is old. And the quality of immigration in Western Europe is generally poor. So Europe exports quality immigration and imports low quality immigration. So that's just not a good trade-off. So and a lot of social tension on multiple levels. Yeah. So I wouldn't be buying in a lot of Western European countries, and very high taxation on real estate, very high taxation. So I wouldn't be buying real estate in Western European countries at this stage, in most of them, until something changes, until I see a catalyst. I don't see a catalyst. And, honestly, as long as there's war in Europe, things just keep escalating. The energy situation isn't getting any better in Europe.
Yeah.
The industry is not getting any better. I just stay clear. The world's big enough to not have to, go there.
Yeah, but Sicily, obviously, on the prices that we were talking about before, and the opportunity for transfer is pretty interesting, from at least from what you said.
Yeah, it's just so cheap. The valuations are just bombed out, right? And then you combine it with a really nice lifestyle. It's good.
Yeah.
And then as Europe becomes poorer, Europeans will move to places that are more affordable, such as parts of Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, but more specifically, Greece and southern Italy have a lot of tax incentives for people moving there. So expect more Europeans moving down south for lower quality of life and lower taxes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing show. Is the best place for people to find you thewanderinginvestor.com?
Yeah, and there's a free newsletter, and if people sign up, they get a free ebook on mistakes to avoid making when buying international real estate.
Yeah, and they can also find you, same name, on Instagram and other social, on YouTube as well, right?
Correct.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate that. You will literally be getting a booked appointment from me that's like about within an hour after I get off. I just think it's very, very interesting. I've never spoken to someone who knows so much about all of the alternative markets as they relate to real estate, but also potential citizenship. It just seems like a very smart business overall. So I really appreciate you spending the time. I'm sure I'm going to want you back at some time as we see things develop in these countries and in the US. So thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. That was Ladislas Maurice. You can find him at thewanderinginvestor.com. I'm Jonathan Green. See you next episode. Thanks for sticking around to the end to get that free preview of the next episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And my guest on the next episode is Justin Gooden of Gooden Development. We're going to be talking passive income, multifamily development, and Indianapolis. We'll see you next episode.